I hope you can all see me. I am Bindi Sandhu. I'm the Deputy Director at UKUPC, and we thought we would invite you all today for our Procurement Recruitment webinar. I know it's very topical at the moment. There's been a lot of issues with recruitment for the university sector in particular. So we thought we would invite Hayes along to give us some market insights and tell us what they understand of the movement of individuals at the moment, what recruitment is like, where the difficulties are, and also salaries, which is also always a key point for everyone. Just to let you know, we will be recording the slides today and we will be sharing those. The presentation, so hopefully everybody is okay with the recording. I think I'm going to hand over to Linda. There will be questions and answers at the end. We will allow some time, but if you note on the bottom of your screens, you'll have Q&A. Rather than put your questions in chat, would you please put them in Q&A? You can also upvote your questions if you feel that you want a pressing question answered over something else. So please do feel free. Linda, can I hand over to you?
Yes, of course, and thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. So today we are going to be discussing the challenging topic that is procurement recruitment in 2022. Firstly, I just wanted to introduce you to our speakers today. Myself, I'm Linda Todd, and I've worked with Hayes for the past 17 years. And throughout that entire time, I've specialised in recruiting for procurement within the public sector. I'm joined by Etienne Pommy, who runs our procurement public sector business in the Midlands, Erin Dixie, who is our Public Services Client Director, and Matthew Lewis, who is the UK Director for Public Services for Hayes. Our webinar today comes in three parts. So first, we're going to update you on the current labour market as a whole. Then we're going to move on to the CIPS Salary and Insights Guide before going through our recommendations for successful recruitment. We will then move on to questions at the end. And again, just to mention, if you could put those in the Q&A box for us, that would be fantastic. Matthew, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Linda. So what we're going to show here is some statistics and background around the recruitment landscape, which effectively, I guess, reinforces what you already know and are feeling in your local markets as you set out to recruit, i.e. it's difficult, but what I'm going to do is evidence why and set out why we are experiencing the kind of supply and demand dynamics that we're seeing in the market, which is why you're having such difficulty recruiting talented individuals at a local level. So thank you. If you could move on to the next slide. Thank you. So this graph is taken from the Office of National Statistics Vacancies and Jobs report in September 22. And what it shows is in the number of thousands, the number of live vacancies across the UK, all walks of life, all role types, all geographies. What it shows is a historical record dating back to 2003 of the total vacancies, which, as you can see, has been pre-pandemic, around about 750,000. And it peaked at about 780,000 in late 2019. And then, of course, it fell off a cliff with the COVID lockdown. But since then, we've seen this dramatic return in terms of demand for skilled individuals, peaking at 1.3 million roles, which is an all-time record, obviously, by some distance, a couple of 3 months ago. Since then, however, the last couple of months, we've seen a slight easing, whereby it's decreased by 34,000 quarter on quarter, but we're still operating at what are basically record levels of demand for talented and skilled individuals at around about 1.2 to 1.3 million. So what we've seen, obviously, is this significant and dramatic tension around supply and demand dynamics, which, of course, is driving wage inflation and difficulty in engaging talent across the board. So thank you. If you turn over to the next one, what we'll show next is where we're seeing this demand by category or by sector and industry. Unfortunately, there isn't a particular section for procurement and supply chain individuals. So we're assuming those lie in the professional, scientific and technical category. But as you can see, there's around about 129,000 live vacancies for professional and technical role types. So if you consider when you're recruiting, let's imagine a significant proportion or a proportion of those are in the procurement space. You need to consider that when you're recruiting, you are competing against literally thousands of other organizations that are effectively looking for the same talented individuals, which again explains precisely why it's so problematic at present to find that talent at a local level. Thank you. Next slide. We also had a look at some other data sources. So this is from the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, CIPD, their labour market outlook report for summer 22. What it tells us is that even though there might be some clouds on the economic horizon and some volatility in the market, employment confidence remains very high. So even if we do see recession at a point in time in future, I don't think it's going to fundamentally affect this skills dynamic, this tension between supply and demand. I think we might see a return back to the pre-pandemic levels of about 750,000, but we're not going to see a dramatic fall away. And therefore, my point being is, unfortunately, the bad news is it's not going to get much easier in the coming days, even if the economic circumstances change. There will still be skill scarcity. There always was pre-pandemic, and that will continue to proliferate in the coming years. So employment confidence is high, and what that means is that this demand will be ongoing for an ongoing basis. What we're therefore seeing in terms of employer response to this is upskilling is the most popular response to hiring difficulties. So what we're saying, if you can't find people in the market, and particularly at the price or the salary that we're aiming to recruit at, obviously, we have little choice but to try and create pipelines of talent of our own. So we're seeing organizations investing in training and development and upskilling as a result. The other key category also, however, is, as you can see on the graph, is 35% of organizations are now seeking to advertise more flexibly in terms of hybrid and remote working and thinking cleverly around how they might engage talent. Bearing in mind pre-pandemic, public services organizations and higher education institutes were probably offering more flexible working than private sector. The sea change we've seen post-COVID, of course, is that now pretty much every organization offers hybrid working and remote working. So we need to consider that what used to be a unique selling point in public services, unfortunately, isn't the case anymore. So we have to think very creatively around how we seek to engage that in-demand talent. Thank you. Next slide. So no surprises here. Lots of organizations have hard to fill vacancies. They are prevalent and persistent. And in fact, 47% show they have hard to fill vacancies, which actually surprised me. It surprised me that it was that low. I would have thought it would be significantly higher. But intentions to hire remain very, very strong, with 72% expecting to recruit in the next 3 months. And of course, that figure is even higher in the world of public services at 84%. So again, from an outlook point of view, demand is very strong. We don't see it changing in the short to medium term, despite the potential clouds on the economic horizon. Okay, thank you. Next slide. So what is driving this and what's caused it? Well, yes, the end of free movement is certainly having an impact on the supply and demand dynamic around availability of talent. So just 43,000 EU citizens actually received visas for the UK in 2021. Which is a significant difference, obviously, to pre-Brexit, when we saw between 230 and 430,000 EU citizens come to the UK. So that's part of the story, but it's not the only part of the story, not the only story. The pandemic obviously has made some fundamental structural changes to the world that we work in. And we saw many people over 50s who had the good fortune of financially being able to step out of the workplace and take early retirement because they just felt, frankly, we only get one shot at this. We want to make the most of our time. Therefore, if I can afford to, I'm going to step out and take some time out. However, there are some signs that those individuals are coming back now with the cost of living crisis and so forth. So that might open up that particular talent pool, who will most likely be looking again for the kind of flexible, maybe even part-time working opportunities. So there is a particular cohort of candidates we could potentially target there. We are also seeing, and it's not just a UK issue, we're seeing high employment levels across the UK and international labour shortages. So it's not just a UK specific issue. Many, many countries across the globe are experiencing the skill scarcity post-pandemic. So again, another reason why it's not going to go away anytime soon. Unfortunately, skill scarcity is here to stay. And on that basis, we need to get very creative about how we set about targeting and engaging with those in-demand, talented people. Thank you.
Fab. Thank you, Matthew. So we're going to move on to the CIPS Salary and Insights Guide now. So life in lockdown might be a thing of the past for many of us, but the long-standing effects of the pandemic are set to last. It has changed our ways of working, our personal and professional priorities, and in the case of procurement, has transformed perceptions on a huge scale. The strategic significance of the function and the role it's played in mitigating the impact of a global supply chain crisis has become increasingly visible and consequently much more valued. As a result, salaries in procurement are continuing to rise and have once again outstripped the national average, with over half of professionals receiving a pay increase. This is an encouraging trend, but it's also, as important as a motivator as salary is, it's not the only driver for professionals when it comes to moving roles. Flexible working, sustainability, and ethical practices are emerging as key incentives. Professionals want to know and organised values match their own. Procurement has seen its fair share of unprecedented challenges over the last year. The flexibility and resilience of teams has been sorely tested. With the aftershocks of the pandemic reinforcing the importance of strategic thinking, as well as accelerating the adoption of digital supply chains, having the ability to extract meaning and value from data is also playing an increasingly important role in procurement. Whilst the way social media has transformed the way information is distributed, will help to shape future buying decisions, impacting the availability of labour as a result. These are just a few of the trends we can expect to see transform the procurement function this year. With this in mind, what can employers do to ensure they are on the front foot when it comes to hiring and retaining the best procurement professionals to support their organisation? To help answer this question, I'll be taking you through some of the insights from our report. First, a short overview of the report. This is the 8th year we have produced the report in partnership with CIPS. It is based on findings of our survey, which was completed by over 7,000 professionals globally. The report covers a broad range of market information, including salaries, bonuses, benefits, interim day rates, and perceptions of procurement. Today, we are going to be focusing on the public sector and the permanent marketplace.
So before we delve into the detail of the report, some of the headlines, which Linda and Etienne will come on to explore further, we've got them on the screen. So certainly there is no shortage of challenges, as Linda referenced, but specifically attracting and retaining the skills needed to deliver within your procurement function has probably never been harder. So it's probably no surprise given the insights that Matt shared, but 63% of organisations struggled to hire procurement talent in the last 12 months. Linked to this, we saw an average salary increase within the procurement sector of 4.9%. However, within this, there are significant disparities, so we will delve into those further. And then finally, probably a fairly frustrating headline for those on the call, but 80% of those looking would prioritise the private sector. However, it's really important that we understand this context so then we can take action to overcome these challenges. So as we continue today, we will be focusing on some really pragmatic recommendations for you. So as I said, overall, 63% of organisations have struggled to find the procurement talent they're looking for, and we've got this broken down by the different sectors. So as you can see, the public sector is about 10% higher than the not-for-profit and private sector, and the challenges listed go hand in hand. So a lack of skills and experience is often coupled with candidate salary expectations, creating a mismatch between what employers are asking for and what employees perceive they are worth. Both the public and the not-for-profit sector see competition from other employers as a significant challenge at almost 50%, with many struggling to compete against private sector employers who are offering lucrative salaries. However, it is interesting to note that the private sector still face significant challenges on salary expectations as well.
How is procurement viewed? Well, it is all heading in the right direction. Procurement professionals feel their status and standing within their organisation is improving year on year. Whether it's the superhuman effects to keep the UK running through the turbulence of a pandemic, global supply chain shortages and now conflict, or high-profile procurement triumphs, such as the national COVID-19 vaccine delivery, the majority of professionals, 63%, tell us that they are more valued, with perceptions improving over the past year. The more strategic the role, the greater the perceived value. Over 2/3 of procurement directors and department heads tell us that their profiles have risen. On a more magnetic level, a majority, 53%, do report that procurement gets involved in a project from the start, but there is clearly room for improvement. Around 1/3 of procurement professionals say that procurement isn't involved at the start of projects.
Moving on to the top skills for 2022. I think Erin has dropped out, but it will come back up in a second. She's just having some technical difficulties. Obviously, professionals need sound technical skills across all sectors and job roles. That much really is a given with procurement professionals, that they aren't able to build credibility or gain business confidence without those technical skills. What's increasing in demand, however, is the need for softer skills alongside those more technical training and developmental skills and the qualifications that come along with that. That successful blend of soft skills and technical skills is what's driving the value of procurement in the eyes of business leaders. There are variations between sectors, not least because of the nature of the work. No one is surprised to discover that the private sector organisations prioritise negotiation skills, for example. All three of the above feature heavily across each sector. Supplier relationship management headed the list across all sectors, but only hit the top of the charts because of its importance to 57% of the private sector. Professionals in all sectors agree about the relative importance of internal stakeholder management, and procurement professionals' work experience can testify to this over the last few years. Moving on to the next slide, please, Arina. Salaries for procurement professionals continue to rise, and they're rising above the national average, which is good. The trend experienced in 2021 with all its mitigating factors has, according to the results, been sustained. The big headlines are that the average salary for procurement professionals is this year £49,743 compared to £47,435 in 2021. That's respondents reporting a 4.9% average increase, which is on top of the 5% achieved through the previous 12 months. So if we look at since the start of the pandemic, the average salary for procurement professionals has risen over 10% cumulatively. Over the past 12 months, this outstrips the national average. Naturally, there are some variables in the details, and this is reported before bonuses are considered, but as a broad indicator, this is a striking difference. According to the results, the proportion of procurement professionals reporting that they've received a salary increase over the past year is 59%. That's a healthy majority of respondents and a rise on the 2021 figure, which was 54%. Looking at the average salaries by region, as with last year, across all sectors, London is still the region paying the highest average salaries to procurement professionals, this year at £65,282, compared to £58,758 in 2021. It also saw one of the highest percentage rises at 11%. However, the largest percentage rises were outside of the capital. If we look at the salaries our survey recorded, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland reported average salary increases of 17%, 16%, and 15% respectively. Within England, London was the only region to record a double-digit percentage rise. Now, if we look at salaries broken down within the public sector specifically, our survey shows that the typical salary ranges between £45,000 and £47,000 per annum, with some variance at either end of the scale. Education specifically, which is comprised of all organisations that provide educational services, including higher education, has an average of £41,064. It's worthwhile considering where this stands against other parts of the public sector, not particularly in a negative light, as I appreciate there are often parameters that cannot be moved regarding salaries. However, if at all possible, this is something that needs to be reviewed when going out to market for recruitment. But it should also be looked at more so as an opportunity to offer a better and more rounded package to make individual offerings more attractive when competing with the other parts of the public sector and the wider market. Now, the benefits that employees are looking for. Over the last 2 to 3 years, remote working has become the norm, and many procurement professionals have really benefited from more flexible working practices. Whether it's having greater influences over where and when they work, these options have meant professionals have more freedom when juggling the differences between their work and their lives, which means that they're able to increase their productivity. Home working is likely to be here to stay to varying degrees, and many prospective candidates expect to see this as a standard benefit when applying for a new job. Organisations are offering a more diverse range of benefits than employees may expect. We've seen that 7 requested benefits out of the top 10 are in fact more available than they are asked for. Interestingly, the changes over the last few years have impacted not only the requirement for increased work-life balance, but have given people a different perspective on the importance of certain benefits, like private medical and pension contributions, which have seen quite big increases over the last few years.
So let's take a closer look at what's causing employees to want to change jobs. And what's really positive is that 86% of employees say an organisation's purpose is important when they're considering a new role. This increased significantly over the last couple of years and is particularly useful for the public sector. So when you are recruiting, it's really important to think about how your roles in procurement link to your organisation's purpose. As Etienne mentioned, flexible working remains an attractive benefit, but not such a differentiator. It used to be that the public sector offered more flexibility than your private sector counterparts. However, it's much more of an even playing field these days. The good news, though, is that you're often still able to offer competitive advantage via your work-life balance offering. And we saw that the importance of organisational purpose and a positive work-life balance should not be underestimated. 62% of employees would be prepared to accept a lower paid job for either a better work-life balance or a job with more purpose, or both.
So we know a huge proportion of your workforce are looking for new roles, but let's have a look at why different levels of employees are considering a move. Knowing some of the factors affecting your own current team will be able to help you to see if there's anything that we can done to help retention within your teams. Firstly, salary is always going to be one of the biggest factors when people are considering a change. But as this slide breaks down, it isn't the only factor. And as people develop through their careers, other things can be almost as important. If you look at the tactical level, career progression is more important to these individuals than salaries. This is really worth considering in your own teams with your procurement officers. Are you able to offer them progression? Do they have clear career paths? And is your role offering the chance to enhance their skills? Training and development at this level also ranks just below salary. So again, it's really worth considering what training and development you are offering to both ensure retention and also attraction when you go out to recruit. So we're going to move on to some recruitment recommendations. As pandemic restrictions have lifted, hiring new employees has stepped up a gear and in some cases started again after a freeze. Our research reveals that hiring the right talent has its challenges, in particular in the public sector, with 71% of employers struggling to find the right talent. The increase in salary expectations shows that it's a candidate's market. Over half of respondents, 52%, who have responsibility for recruiting say this is a challenge, up from 43% last year, making it the second biggest challenge faced this year. Salary is always going to be a problem, particularly across the public sector where you have limited control with bandings. However, as you can see, salary isn't the only reason organisations are struggling to recruit. A lack of sector skills and experience dominates the list here, and this is something as recruiters that we are feeling every day. Whilst you can't change your salary bandings, I think that expectations is something that you should reflect on. We can't change the fact that the market has moved significantly, and you can no longer attract candidates with the skills and experience levels that you would have been able to just a few years ago. Are you being realistic in your expectations when you recruit? Individuals that are successfully recruiting at the moment are those that are accepting a shift in expectations and working out what is essential in their requirements and what is a nice to have. By having less rigid essential criteria, these individuals are being much more successful when they go out to the market. The other and perhaps most shocking statistic on this slide for me is that 26% of respondents failed to recruit due to internal processes. The main contributing factor in this was time to appointment and onboarding. Both of these things are things that are in an organisation's control and in most cases something that can be fixed. The current market is competitive, and if you have found a candidate worth offering a role to, you need to be aware that you won't be the only organisation in conversation with them. You need to move quickly if you're with your offers, and if your onboarding is going to take time, you will lose candidates. However, there are simple steps you can take to help this. As a future line manager, once you've offered someone a role, stay in touch with them. Keep them informed of the process. Meet them for a coffee. Involve them in team meetings and engage them. We now work in a very virtual world these days, and building relationships with future recruits can make all the difference in getting them started with your organisation. Here we have a breakdown by sector and industry of individuals looking to move roles. Currently, we know nearly 1/3 of people working in procurement expect to move in the coming year, up from 27% in 2021. The largest proportion rise is in the public sector, and the industry with the biggest proportion of professionals looking to move is in health. As you can see, education has 25% of respondents planning to move roles. If you are recruiting at the moment, it's worth looking at the private sector chart, which shows where most employee movement is coming from. Could any of those backgrounds suit your organisation? So, what can you do to recruit successfully in the current marketplace? These are some of the recommendations that we have come up with and we think are going to be really important over the next year and possibly longer as organisations recruit. You need to know and grow your own talent. This isn't going to fix your current skills gaps and vacancies that you currently have, but investing in your current team and developing your own talent will be a long-term solution as the talent and skills shortage across procurement shows no sign of slowing. As our guide shows, there is a huge mismatch between salaries and expectations. When you recruit, you need to be realistic. Job specifications often have huge lists of essential requirements, which not only put off potential applicants, but also how many of them are really essential and how many of them would just be nice to have. You need to really think about what you need from potential candidates and go out to the market with as much of an open mind as possible. What you need may not exist within your salary parameters, but if you take a realistic view and look at applicants with an open mind, you may find yourself so much more successful. Review pay and benefits. We appreciate this isn't always possible. However, even a small change, such as getting approval to offer the top of a salary banding instead of the bottom, can make a real difference in recruitment. Hold up a mirror and be yourselves. Be honest and be authentic. Be clear about your employer value proposition. Why you? Why your organisation? Why your team? And why you as a manager? Make sure you have a broad reach when it comes to your recruitment to ensure you attract a diverse pool of candidates. The value that professionals increasingly attribute to diverse and inclusive hiring practices cannot be ignored. Committing to the use of inclusive language and diverse imagery in recruitment materials, ensuring hiring panels are conveyed to take in a range of opinions, and providing conscious inclusion training to key stakeholders are examples of purposeful actions that can help to attract and retain talented staff. Use accessible and inclusive language and imagery. Make sure the application and selection process achieves the right outcome for all. The market is busy and candidates have multiple applications and multiple interviews. The harder you make it for candidates to apply for a role, the less that will. Long application forms and covering letters are the first thing that puts candidates off your role. In this market, candidates have a huge choice, and employers now have to work so much harder to attract the candidates instead of expecting them to commit time to an application process. We need to change the way we think about interviews. Interviews are now a two-way process. You should go into every interview with the intention that that candidate comes out with a positive view of your organisation, regardless of if you want to hire them. You need to sell your organisation in that interview. Be prepared to sell and get the right people on board to help. And finally, employers will need to act fast to secure the professionals they need to help their organisations navigating the challenges in time still to come, meaning hiring managers should be briefed as a matter of priority as soon as a vacancy is identified. With many candidates often having up to 4 or 5 job offers to choose from, speed to hire is more important than ever. Most candidates are receiving offers within 48 hours of an interview, and they should have their offer letters within 48 hours of an offer. If you have long drawn out process in generating offers, you will lose candidates. Thank you very much. We will now move over to some questions. So please, if you do have any questions, please do pop them into the box. So the 4.9% increase, Etienne, I believe that's across the public sector. Would that be correct? So
That's
sorry.
It's across both the public and the private sectors.
Perfect.
Because the national increases, they take them as a whole from all of the sectors.
So I think we're saying we don't have a breakdown of public-private, specifically in procurement. But what I can tell you is there's a significant disparity. If you take the entire economy as a whole, the average percentage growth of salaries across the whole economy to about June 22 was 5.1% as an overall average across all professions. Within that, you won't be surprised to learn the private sector is greater at 5.9%. However, the public sector sits at 1.8%. So that significant disparity that already existed, let's say a couple of years ago, is growing and growing fast. So we have to work really hard around other reasons beyond salary to think about how we attract and engage candidates, whether it's benefits packages or flexible working or training and development, or the mission and the purpose of the organization, insofar as why somebody might want to come and work at your institution. Those are the things you really need to play on to make sure we're competing across other categories beyond salary.
Fab. One of the questions here is, what are the reasons given relating to why the private sector is preferred over the public sector? So myself and Etienne will answer this one. So my experience currently recruiting into public sector is that the fact that salaries are higher in the private sector currently is definitely one of the biggest pulls, along with benefits package. So people are looking for things such as private health insurance and bonuses, and they do tend to be one of the reasons people are leaning more towards the private sector at the moment. Etienne, I'm not sure on your take on that.
Yeah, I would echo that as well, specifically with the cost of living, increases that we're seeing at the moment. Salary is one that's really high on the agenda for most people. But alongside that, like I mentioned earlier, when we're talking about benefits, the flexible working is really high up there. People have really got accustomed to that. And the private sector has been, in some instances, not all instances, but in some instances, more flexible than the public sector. The private sector has. And I've had personal experiences on a couple of occasions recently within the last month or so, where a candidate has turned down a role that they've been offered from a university directly to go for a role within the private sector because it was more flexible. And that one was nothing to do with salary. It was like for like. The main reason was because of the flexible working practices that they had. The secondary reason to that was because of the annual leave, which is quite surprising, to be honest, given that universities tend to have a significant amount of annual leave. But that was a secondary reason for them going for the private sector as well, because that also was better.
Thank you, Etienne. I think, we have another. So do we have a breakdown on average procurement salaries based on the level of CIPS qualification? We do have a completely separate slide on this, so we will be able to share that. We've got the copy of, we can send links for you to be able to download this guide, or you can get in touch. But yes, absolutely. There is a whole section of this guide that is dedicated to your level of CIPS and the average salaries you can expect as you move through those levels with your qualifications.
While we wait to see if any further questions come through, Linda, unrehearsed, so I'm going to put you on the spot, but I'm interested to understand your views around creating pipelines of talent insofar as upskilling and developing. And similarly, where might hirers compromise? Remember, you mentioned there's a whole list of essential criteria that people often define. How might people compromise in an effective way to open the gate to more candidates?
So I think one of the most common requirements we get from the public sector as a whole is PCR 2015 or OJU knowledge, which of course is very specialist to the public sector. But when you are recruiting in a market that is quite talent short, it would be easier to open up to individuals that may not have led those processes, they may have assisted, or in fact, they might not have worked on them, they might be from the private sector. But a simple tweak with, setting aside some time to maybe teach those and recruit with people without them would open the doors to many more candidates. You touched there on kind of developing your own talent pause, Matt. During COVID, one of the biggest things that was shelved was CIPS support. So many organisations stopped CIPS study programmes. So if you are able to develop your own teams and offer things like that, that is a huge benefit at the moment. And also when you go out to recruit, if you're able to offer potential candidates CIPS study and support with that, make sure it's on your adverts and make sure you're talking about it at the early onset, because it is something that isn't out there as much as people assume it is at the moment.
Great, thank you. Linda, you got your hand up.
I have a question actually. What do you think about the entrance into procurement? Are there many new entrants, or are you finding it's really the same people doing the same circuit?
I know that Hayes have been involved with CIPS for a number of years in trying to assist. So we've done some work with schools and colleges to talk about procurement. I think it is better than it was previously. I think more people are learning about procurement and we are getting people in. You know, there's been some great work actually across private and public sector with apprenticeships. So I have seen so many more apprenticeships in the last 24 months than previous, but it is still something that people don't know about and are still, you know, I interview individuals multiple times a day and most people still fall into procurement. We're still not getting enough people going out to get themselves a career within procurement, but that is just an education piece, and I do think it will slowly increase and we will see, I think we will see more people coming through as, you know, CIPS continues that work with schools and colleges, and procurement's own reputation grows.
Thank you.
Just picking up on that as well, I think that the ball kind of needs to be put in the court of the various public sector organisations as well. From my experience over the last couple of years, there has been an increase in apprenticeships being raised through, you know, I've experienced quite a few in my local region through a lot of the local authorities. National Highways is a big one, and HS2 is another really big one as well, who have led some very big and very good apprenticeship programs. And I think that's definitely something that and I don't want to shift the blame really, but it's something that really needs to have a much larger focus than it does, because we know that we're facing a talent shortage. We don't have that talent, so realistically, we need to create it ourselves.
I've got a really good question here that, again, I think myself and Etienne will take. Is there any confusion caused by the range of job titles that organisations may choose to use? There's a huge range. I think on the whole, organisations that use procurement in their job title are the most successful in attracting from an advert. I think where we've had confusion is the addition of the word commercial. And I think it is mainly due to commercial managers. So when you are going out for a commercial manager, that can be such a wide range. If you look at, for example, Transport for London, I think 70% of their workforce are commercial managers and they're not working in procurement. So there is definite confusion. My thoughts are that if procurement is in the job title, you are usually fairly safe in attracting the right kind of individuals. Etienne, any thoughts?
I think I'd echo what you said about making sure that the procurement is in the job title, because when candidates are out there searching for vacancies online, they don't have the knowledge that we have about the market and about how the different roles are advertised, and that you're purely kind of setting yourself up to fail in some instances. That doesn't mean that you couldn't call a job a commercial manager, for example. You could call it a commercial manager and put procurement in brackets in the same line, and then that would still come up in the same search as the way that those search engines work. That's what I tend to recommend when people are looking for procurement commercial managers, if that makes sense. I would say within the public sector specifically, there's loads of different job titles that you could have for the same thing realistically. There's more of a disparity between the public sector and the private sector. They tend to use quite varying job titles, but I think a lot of the time, the easiest way to differentiate it, if you need to, is looking at the level of experience that's required for the role, the scale of the projects that role is looking after, and then also a really easy differentiator is what kind of management responsibility that role may have as well.
Thank you. So another question here is, the cost of living crisis and economic strain can also dissuade people from the private sector due to job security. Have you noticed a trend in people making safer public sector choices? Yes, absolutely. Erina mentioned about an organisation's purpose earlier, and we have definitely seen post-COVID a lot more individuals being really interested in the public sector. So there is definitely a lot more interest now, and people do really want to work somewhere where there is a purpose. So I definitely think there is a lot more interest. And you mentioned about the safety, absolutely. In COVID and since, we have seen more individuals wanting to work for organisations that they deem as having that security, particularly a few interims, maybe moving back into permanent roles within the public sector. So there is definite positives out there in the market too, and that is one of them. Etienne, any thoughts?
I don't really have much to add on that one, to be honest. You've covered that bang on.
I'll add something, Linda, if I may, in that
Yeah.
I wonder whether, and I'm thinking broadly public services here, not higher education specifically, but there is often some fairly damaging press releases, statements, if you like, made by government around funding, longevity of departments and so forth. So, for example, Jacob Rees-Mogg, 92,000 heads off the top of the civil service headcount as an aspirational position, taking us back to pre-Brexit levels. That has a damaging impact on people's faith in joining, for example, the civil service on that basis, because they'll start asking questions about longevity of opportunity. Very different environment in higher education, obviously, but we do know that finance is a potentially difficult issue in going forward, and budgets and cost controls and so forth. While procurement will have a fundamental role to play within that, and obviously therefore will be valued accordingly, there may be some value in front-footing in your discussions with candidates some of those pressures to actually proactively address, yes, we're expecting to see cost pressures, funding constraints and challenges around that. Yes, we're expecting to embark on some programs around that, but your role will have a fundamental impact on that and be a fundamental part of it. So your contribution to the organization therefore is both valued and has longevity around it.
Thank you. So in your opinion, are private sector companies comfortable taking on candidates from the public sector? So I, as I mentioned, have been with Hayes for quite a number of years, and for a very long time, one of my biggest, one of the things that was hard in our world was that the private sector was never really interested in people making a transition from the public sector. And it's been something that has frustrated us. Now, the private sector is suffering as much of a skills shortage as the public sector. And I would say over the last maybe mainly 12 months, for the first time, I am seeing the private sector take candidates from the public sector. It is at certain levels though. So I would say mainly your kind of procurement officer and procurement and category manager levels, particularly where you might be kind of IT focused. There is definite attraction now. The private sector is struggling, and certain industries such as insurance, utilities, they actually really like someone from a regulated background. So we have seen an increase there. It is definitely pockets of the market though. There is still levels where you don't see as much transition, but I would say those two areas are probably where we are now seeing competition from the private sector. Etienne, anything to add?
No.
Perfect. The next question is, how are your candidates coping with moving to the private sector from the public sector? So on the whole, I would say most move across with no issues. I have had a few instances where people recently I've worked with that have done 6 to 12 months in the private sector and have actually now wanted to come back to the public sector, which is positive for most people on this webinar. But I would say it's a few individuals. It's not a huge amount, and I would say on the whole people seem to be transitioning quite well. I've just seen a few examples where they have missed process, and I think they've been a little bit surprised by potentially moving into the private sector where things aren't regulated and there's not so many defined processes, which can be a challenge for someone moving into a new role. Etienne.
I've not personally had any examples of people that have moved to the private sector that have moved back or have wanted to move back just yet. But that, like you say, it will depend on the individual and it will be a case-by-case basis. But I think a lot of the time it works both ways. It's a double-edged sword. A lot of the time the level of freedom that you can get in the private sector and the lack of policies, procedures and governance that goes along with the role that you're doing can be seen as a benefit to some candidates as well. But that will, like I say, depend on a case-by-case basis on the type of individual that it is, because some people will like that structure and rigidity, and other people will like the freedom of being able to go there and negotiate and have more autonomy over what they do.
Does having an MBA qualification or other postgraduate qualification along with CIPS help with recruitment or have more procurement roles available to candidates? Is there a different view in the private vs public sector regarding this? So I think with all kind of qualifications, we find that there is normally always a demand for some form of CIPS, and anything along with that is additional. I rarely have roles where they specify an MBA, but they will always look at that favourably. I think, you know, particularly in HE, I know that a lot of HE organisations I've recruited for have enjoyed and looked for people to have as much education as possible. I've not come across many roles where it's been a prerequisite, but I think it probably would always help your application. With regards to public versus private, I haven't seen many differences here. Etienne, I don't know if you've seen any differentiators.
I haven't seen any differentiators either. I think if you've got CIPS or you're working towards CIPS, that's the main thing that employers tend to look for, both in the public and the private sectors. I think the public sector is more likely to have that as a prerequisite than the private sector. But I echo what you say about the MBAs. I personally haven't had a role where that's been a prerequisite, but it would always be looked at advantageously.
Back to the job titles, actually, and this is a really interesting one because we did miss this one out. What about sourcing managers or category managers as job titles? Do they appeal to the market? Category managers, definitely. So everyone does know what a category manager is, and you will receive that. That is definitely something that is out there on the market. Sourcing managers, we definitely see less of. I see much fewer vacancies of sourcing managers these days. It can also sometimes now be a recruitment term. So you can get sourcing managers within recruitment and HR. So there can be a little bit of some disparity there, but on the whole, definitely category managers. And I think most people would know sourcing managers. I'm just finding that is slowly sinking in its kind of popularity.
Yeah, I would see sourcing managers. I see them more so in the private sector, in manufacturing and building type organizations. And I would see it probably more akin to a commodities manager type of role, which is definitely something that you would see much more heavily in the private sector. But category manager definitely is very much up there.
Are you seeing big jumps between levels of experience, e.g. procurement category managers moving into senior, exec and leadership roles? I would say my personal opinion is the biggest jumps are at the slightly lower end of the market. So we are seeing procurement, maybe admins jumping quite quickly into procurement officer roles, and likewise procurement officers jumping into procurement manager and category manager roles, because that's where the biggest skills shortage is. So the most vacancies in the public sector at the moment are procurement managers and procurement officers. That's our biggest skills shortage. Anything paying 40 to about 55,000 is where we are struggling. So I've seen a lot of jumps from people that were procurement officers to suddenly being procurement managers quite quickly, and maybe having done only a short stint in procurement officer type level roles, just because there is demand, and quite quickly they will get headhunted elsewhere because there are so many vacancies at that level at the moment.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think also we haven't particularly seen as much movement at the senior procurement manager, senior category manager and head of procurement or director of procurement level, which would warrant the need for them to take large jumps in the market, because those people are around. They might not be actively looking, but you can headhunt them for a position. You wouldn't really particularly need to go to the next rung down for them to take a large step up, if that makes sense.
And then we've got one more here, which is, are many organisations providing new starts incentives in supporting a CIPS qualification? So I am seeing more organisations offering CIPS now. It does always come with a past probation, usually a kind of past probation agreement. we as recruiters are trying to educate as many of our line managers at the moment as possible about having to offer wider benefits. And I'm really pleased with the amount of organisations that are now able to offer CIPS support to either existing studiers or new studiers. And at that junior end of the market, it really will make a difference, because most people in procurement are very ambitious. You're all very driven, and you are all about kind of bettering yourselves. So I think most people want to study, and I think that is a huge benefit that if you can offer, and we are pleased to see people offering it, then it's great.
Yeah, I tend to see that being offered more heavily in the public sector than the private sector as well, which is also a really good thing to see.
I would just add that if you do offer it, make sure you shout about it, make sure people know about it in the recruitment process, because I think what we've seen is sometimes people are offering it and assuming that it's a given, when actually it's very much not a given. It is a differentiator.
And don't assume your kind of procurement managers or category managers wouldn't be interested in it if it is something you might have budget for. Like I mentioned earlier, so many people had their training budgets cut within COVID. So actually a lot of people either had to self-fund their study that they might have already started, or they had to pause it. So don't forget to mention it at the higher levels as well, not just your kind of procurement officer type roles. I think we have reached the end of our questions, unless anyone has anything else they would like answered.
Last, we just, go ahead, Binti, thanks.
I have a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
How many roles, as the senior levels get higher, are there many roles that go from head of procurement or procurement manager to director? I'm just wondering how many of those open up in the education sector.
Do you mean how many live roles at kind of heads of procurement level?
Above heads of procurement, does it really open up at a director level?
So I'll be honest, in HE and education, we don't see many of those vacancies. We tend to see people leaving the sector at that point because, and this might not be the case in your organisation, but we find that in HE as a whole, most procurement managers report to finance. So there isn't always that kind of board level report for procurement or commercial, whereas a lot of other organisations have now got board level reports. So if you look at the civil service, for example, and even in the charity sector, we see a lot more board level procurement reporting, which opens up those kind of directors. The housing sector used to mirror the education sector, and I'd say that's gone through a real kind of transformation, and we also do see procurement there on the board quite often. So we see a lot of procurement directors within those types of organisations now. That's not saying there aren't, there definitely are some directors across education. We do just see less of them.
Yeah. And what about, I forgot the question actually I was going to ask. The HE sector, what should we do to encourage people to join the HE sector? Is there anything that you would suggest?
I definitely think about your value proposition. So, you know, it is all about, it's all about what your organization does. You know, we do need to assume now that people don't know about the organization. So people are applying for roles, but they're not putting as much work as they might have used to into looking at what the organization does. Unfortunately, organizations need to sell a lot more. So you do need to sell what you're kind of offering. Separately, your role. So most procurement people, as we mentioned, are very ambitious. It is all about what they can look at, you know, what can they save, what procurements can they run. So it's not just about having a job spec that might be quite standard. You need to put a bit more about the exciting content in there. You know, is there a new, you know, are you building new residential halls? Is there a huge FM project? Stuff like that, that might seem something you would talk about in an interview. Make sure you are talking about it at an early point, because I think attraction is really key. And there's some, you know, the education sector is fantastic. There is so much good stuff that you do, and I think it is really attractive. You just need to make sure that you sell it a bit more, and there needs to be less assumption that people will just apply. You do need to work a bit harder for the candidates in the market at the moment.
And what about retention? Are you finding people stay within the education sector, or are they looking to move out?
So I think our statistics said that 25% are looking to move out. So that's probably 1 in 4 of your current workforce. And I know that's probably quite a scary statistic, but I would say that most people have currently got their eyes on the marketplace. And if they can get better elsewhere, then people definitely will be looking. So again, when you are thinking about retention, if you're managing a team, think about what procurements your team are working on. Are they getting good stuff? Are they getting their teeth stuck into the right projects and the right things that are going to motivate them? Because sometimes you can't offer more salary and you might not be able to offer a training budget, but can you offer them a tender that they're going to really run with? And, you know, are you making sure that the interesting work is divvied up amongst your team? Things like that will also really help retention.
Thank you.
CPD's a big one on that one as well.
Go on, Etienne.
I was just going to say, continuous professional development's a big one for that as well, and ensuring that you proactively have a clear career plan set in place for the people in your team, so that they know, first of all, that they're valued within the organisation, that they can see where they're going to and what they're going to get out of that. Because if they know that they're working towards something and that they're going to better their career and their experience out of sticking around a bit longer, then they're more likely to not look elsewhere or not be tempted when they're approached by opportunities elsewhere.
Completely agree. And that was actually the point I was going to make earlier, was around retention. We talked a lot about attraction, but what about retention? So all the things you said are absolutely fundamental and correct. Investment in people's careers, absolutely. But also thinking about management technique. People often leave roles because unfortunately they're not happy with the leadership style of their management. So there's maybe some work to be done around training and development in management and leadership skills. Valuing contribution and recognition is also really important, feeling valued, as you said. Thinking about work-life balance, which perhaps public services organizations might be better placed to support, and flexibility around working in terms of creating an environment of trust where, as long as the outcomes are delivered, does it really matter whether they're at their desk at all times during working hours, but give them some freedom if they have an appointment to go off to, etc. Sure. Those kind of things. Organizational culture, those lots of things that you can do that don't cost anything, that might improve your retention of people to take away some of the challenges around attraction.
Thank you.
We just have one last question and I think we will have to close. So which sector has stakeholders that engage positively with procurement the most from your view? So this is probably quite a tough question to answer, but we do have statistics, and I actually think that the private sector came out highest here, closely followed by the charity and not-for-profit sector, and then it was the wider public sector. So it seems like the charity sector has obviously got some really well-engaged stakeholders. We can obviously send our report that does break this down a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, it's quite a tough one to answer, but there is definitely some stuff in our report there, but charity and not-for-profit did come out the highest.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the Hayes panel for all of your questions, your information. It's been really interesting, actually. And it's something different to really understand what's going on in the marketplace. So you will have seen Suzanne's message there. The next UKUPC webinar will be on the 16th of November. Details will follow. We're not sure what the title will be, and that will be from UKUPC will deliver that. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you all found it really interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.